What's up, people? Welcome back to 4Bet Blind. My name is Will. Today I'm recapping a 1-2 session I played at Final Table Poker here in Portland, Oregon. This was a wild one. Lots of big pots, tons of action, and a monstrous final hand that ended up with over 900 big blinds in the pot. Without further ado, let's get into it. The first hand of the session starts out with a limp from middle position, followed by a raise to 15 from the low jack. I'm next to act in the hijack and I look down at ace king. I 3-bet to $50 and it folds back to the low jack, who doesn't take too long before deciding to call. We go heads up to a flop that comes king deuce 4 with 3 hearts, giving me top pair, top kicker in a 3-bet pot, so I'm feeling pretty good. The low jack checks, and this is a spot where I'm going to be c-betting pretty frequently, so I go for a small size of $25, figuring there's lots of single heart hands and medium pocket pairs that will be enticed by this small price. My opponent seems to agree that the price is right as he makes the call. Off to a turn now, which brings the 6 of diamonds, which doesn't change much. My opponent checks again, and now it's time to figure out the best way to get the rest of his chips. With around $200 behind and over $150 in the pot, the stack to pot ratio is already pretty shallow. I consider going for something like 100 to 150, but I'm concerned that size will look too milky. I want it to look like I have a hand like ace queen with the ace of hearts, and I'm trying to blow him off. I decide that a jam is the most bluffy sizing I can pick, but before I go for it, I really want to sell the story that I'm on the fence about this spot. In order to do that, I decide to go deep into the tank, like way deep, almost as deep as an episode of my favorite TV show, Maury.
Bring out the owl!
Eventually, enough time passes that I think my opponent gets the idea, and I even look over and see that he's getting a bit impatient. So I put my plan into action and go all in for my remaining $200. My opponent doesn't instantly call and he doesn't instantly fold, so I'm almost certain to have the best hand here. After a while he even says, I can beat everything but a king, which is like a Mozart symphony to my ears. Finally my opponent makes a motion towards the pot, but it's his cards that are heading in, not his chips. He found a very good laydown, shout out to my opponent there, but I'm happy to take down a 3-bet pot this early in the session. Next, I'm dealt ace-jack offsuit in early position. There's an under the gun straddle, so I open to 25. Only the straddle makes the call and we go heads up to a flop, which comes ace, jack, ace. I flop the nut boat. I'm in shock, but things get even crazier when my opponent announces all in. I can't believe it. I'm just gonna take one moment to soak all this in while I'm at the table when I notice a beautiful brunette woman walking towards me wearing a red bikini. Before I can even acknowledge her presence, I get a vibration in my phone and it's my mom texting me that my dad has finally come home from buying cigarettes. And oh, I'm sorry, I fell asleep at the table again. As I was saying, the flop comes ace, jack, ace, and my opponent is first to act. Regrettably, he doesn't go all in. In fact, he gives me a look and says, takes his cards and open mucks. Whenever an opponent destroys you this hard, you have to give them props, so I show the hand.
It really is.
Shout out to Mike, a super fun player to play with who destroyed my soul this hand. Also, Dad, please come home. One orbit later, I'm once again in early position when I look down at ace-jack, this time the suited variety. I open to 15 and get called by under the gun +1, the cutoff, and the small blind. Off to the flop we go, and it's another sexy one as it comes king queen 7 with 2 hearts, giving me a royal flush draw. I decide to set the trap a bit here and start with a check. Under the gun +1 decides to bet $12 and both the cutoff and small blind make the fold. Back to me here, and $12 is just a little bit too small when I have the goddamn nuts, so I make it $50. I barely have time to record this next line of dialogue when my opponent instantly 3-bets to $100. Obviously, I can't go anywhere with the royal flush draw, but I'm super annoyed as this spot is way less profitable now. It's like when you're watching an episode of Pawn Stars and someone brings in an antique coin that was used in ancient Rome, only to find out that it's actually a token from Chuck E. Cheese that some 11-year-old threw up all over, and then Rick looks at you like you're a fucking dumbass, and fuck you, I don't care, I love Chuck E. Cheese, I'm all in. Obviously, my opponent snap calls. I ask him if he has pocket sevens and he says no, so we're probably up against some sort of two-pair combo against which we have reasonable equity. So basically a coin flip here for $670. Looking for a heart or a 10, the turn is no help. It comes the 3 of clubs. Off to the river, one more shot at this, but it's the 4 of spades, brick, brick. Not much to be done about this hand, it is what it is. I hate Chuck E. Cheese. This hand starts with under the gun +1, +2, and the hijack all calling a $5 button straddle. The small blind calls the button straddle as well before I look down at pocket 9s in the big blind. Time to raise things up, I make it $45. Only the +1 limper calls and we go heads up to a flop which comes queen 10 6 with 2 clubs. I like to utilize my range advantage here and go with a c-bet of $25. My opponent molds things over for a little bit before deciding to click it back to $50. I think this is a fairly typical fold considering I lose to all the value, I don't have backdoor clubs, and if a 9 does come on the turn, I'm going to be losing to king jack at some frequency. But for whatever reason in game, I just kinda didn't buy it, so I decided to make the call, getting a reasonably good price. The turn makes things even more interesting as it's an offsuit 8 giving me an up and down straight draw where a 7 or a jack both give me a straight. I check once more and this time my opponent sizes down to $45. This is the point in the hand where I realize my opponent was probably full of shit. If he had a hand like queen 10 or pocket 6s, he probably wants to go pretty large on this turn considering the number of draws available. Instead, he elects to go for almost a quarter-size pot bet, which doesn't represent a lot of strength. The only other plausible value hand I could see is some sort of queen X like queen jack or king queen. A lot of times you'll see live players size down with non-nut value hands that still warrant a bet. With all that information in mind, I think the best play here is a check raise all in. I have the perfect stack size for it, I'm almost certain my opponent would fold a queen, and I have outs even if I do get called. In game, I opt for just a smooth call, getting a good price and knowing I'm ahead of a lot of his semi-bluffs. If you're a regular viewer of the vlog, you might agree that turn check raises are one of the weaker parts of my game, but that's a conversation for another video. This video is about hands, and this one concludes with an innocuous 4 of spades on the river. I check one last time to my opponent, and he decides to bet $100. Nothing has changed on this river, and my opponent is laying me a very good price. But how do you call 3 streets on this run out with pocket 9s? In game, it takes me about a minute before I finally work up the heart and make the call. My opponent asks, "Do you have a pair?" Which is always a good sign when you're bluff catching. I tell him I do, he says he has a 4, I have pocket 9s, I win. Pretty weird hand that probably should have been over on the flop, but I will take this result. Also, quick interlude to shout out Mark Davies of MD Poker. He was at Final Table this night. Go give his channel a follow, go give his channel views, really great content. Alright, last hand of the session, and it is a doozy. We are playing a 5-card PLO double board bomb pot where I'm dealt queen queen 9 8 6 with hearts. The first flop comes tray queen 6 and the second flop comes king deuce ace all hearts, giving me top set and the nut flush. God, I'm good at this game. The action starts with under the gun +1 leading for $10, +2 calling, before I raise to $60 in the low jack, trying to make it reasonably small to keep weaker hands in. It seems like it works as both players make the call. 3 ways to the turn and the pot is already over $200. The turn brings the 7 of hearts on top and the 7 of spades on bottom, so while my flush is still good, I'm very likely going to need help on the top board as one of my opponents probably has 45 for the straight. Both players check to me, and still wanting to keep both of them in, I bet $150, around 2/3 pot. +1 makes the call before +2 rips in his remaining $177. The action is not reopened, so both me and +1 just call. Off to a huge river with over $750 in the pot already, praying for the board to pair or a heart to roll off so I can scoop this. Somehow, some way, I get no help on the top board as it comes the 10 of spades, and the bottom board pairs with the ace of diamonds. So now not only is my top set losing to a straight, but my flush is probably losing to a boat. Just as I'm shaking my head at this catastrophic river, the +1 player ships in for $426. This is now a horrible spot. I'm very likely to be losing on one of these boards, if not both now. I just want to take one last look at my hand before I send it into the muck.
Oh wait, I think I have a good hand. Hold on. Oh, that was a good river. I call.
I feel like Lloyd Christmas trying to read a newspaper. Finally, I realize, oh, I have the nuts straight. I call. +1 flips over 45 with a wheel draw and a heart blocker, while +2 flips over 45 with 2 pair. Somehow hearts are still good, and with the nut straight, I end up scooping a pot of over $1,600. If the room you're playing at doesn't run bomb pots, I encourage you to petition management to start incorporating them more. They're so huge, this pot ended up being 75% of my win this session. Shortly after this hand, I rack up and head to cash out. I was in for $600 and cashed out for around $1,800, giving me a profit of $1,200 in about 6 hours. This is going directly into my World Series fund, as they made a pretty big change that's going to affect which tournaments I'm able to play, which I talked about in a recent video. Anyways, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of the hands in the comments, and if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe or drop a like. Thanks for watching, see y'all in the next video.